to look at my title slide. So I'm Don Banfield, I'm the Goals Committee Chair. Those of you who have tuned in a bunch to MEPAG talks recently, you've heard me give this talk or earlier versions of it several times, but this time it's the real thing. We have an actual version out, the 2020 version, and we're very proud of that. So next slide. And when I say we, this is who I mean by we. This is the MEPAG Goals Committee. You saw this picture quickly yesterday, although let me just point out that it was a much younger picture of me, kind of a baby picture of me, and this one is even like 10 years old. So everybody else on this slide looks as good as they do, but I look a little older than this. Let me also point out that Alfonso in Goals 1 was smart enough to wear his N95 mask a few years ago, even for this picture, so that's really prescient. I'm impressed. One thing to add to this, we had a bunch of help also from Kevin Watts, and so we added him to the authorship list for Goal 4. So I just wanted to mention that. Unfortunately, I didn't have a picture for Kevin. So these are the people who did all the work. Thanks to them, it was volunteer, and there was a lot of community input. They digested that and produced this good document that we've got out now. So next slide. I guess just very briefly, I wanted to remind you guys what indeed the goals document is supposed to be. The mission of the document is to prioritize the flight measurements that we could do as a community to achieve the high priority Mars system science goals. And we update that roughly every 2 years, every maybe 3 years, and it was due this last year. So that was what we did, undertook that major undertaking. It's organized as a set of goals and a subordinate to that objectives. And then below that, sub-objectives, and even closer to the bone, there's investigations. And we've separated it into 4 different goals: life, climate, geology, and humans. You probably are all familiar with that, but I just wanted to briefly go over that. So next slide. The timeline for this revision that we did started back at the 9th Mars Conference last July, and we had folks that were trying to integrate all of the new science that came out at that meeting and digest it and help our goals committee ingest it into the draft that came out in February. Actually, I guess in January, and then we accepted input from the community in a couple of forums in February, revised some, and then we just finally released it at the end of March. So hopefully you guys now all have that in your hands, and it can serve as a good reference to the Decadal survey white papers that you all are writing. That was our goal, and hopefully you guys will use the new MEPAG goals document. So next slide. This one is just kind of an eye chart. It's basically showing you all 4 goals down the left, and then each of the boxes is a different objective of that goal, and each of the bullets is a different sub-objective of that objective. And remember, underneath each one of those sub-objectives, there's 1 or more investigations. So this is turtles all the way down. There's a lot of levels of hierarchy of the goals document. What I really wanted to show you here is that all of the places in red are where we've done major changes to either the prioritization or the wording of the title of the goal, objective or sub-objective. And this is even an underestimate of the changes throughout the document, because I'm getting some feedback, unfortunately. Even the ones that are black have some significant text changes in the investigation level. So this has been a major change. So I encourage you guys to go and actually download the document, read it, and digest it, and hopefully use it in your white papers and proposals in the future. So next slide. Just to really briefly get into the changes that we put in each of the different goals. One of the biggest changes in Goal 1, we removed the distinction between extinct and extant life. And what that caused was that we actually merged, those were 2 separate things in the prior version of the document. We merged those into Objective 1A, and we created a second objective, Objective 1B, to look at the extent of abiotic organic chemical evolution to balance 1A, where presumably life is making signatures. It's important to understand abiotic signature generation as well on Mars. For Goal 2, the changes were mainly a shortening and updating of the pros, and we did do some reprioritization of the different sub-objectives, noting that MAVEN has done a lot of good work, and there's kind of a renewed focus in the community on polar science. So it wasn't as dramatic of a change for goal 2, but the reprioritization and the tightening of the pros makes it a little bit more accessible for the community, we think. So next slide. The geology goal, goal 3, mainly objective A was changed, the geologic record, and it really was mostly just a reorganization. I say here concepts are conserved. We actually have in the document at the very end a mapping that shows each of the different sub-objectives and maybe even investigations and how they map from the prior version to the new version, and essentially nothing was lost. But it was just reorganized in a different manner. We did add 2 new investigations about the history of sulfur and carbon on Mars, and a link from the Martian meteorites and return samples to the geologic evolution. Turning to the human exploration goal, goal 4, this was also restructured quite a lot with the aim of making it agnostic to whatever mission architecture NASA chooses to pursue for human exploration. The prior version had a specific set of mission concepts, and we tried to back away from that, but while still retaining all of the same ideas of objectives and sub-objectives that need to be achieved. So as with goal 3, the concepts were conserved in the human exploration goal, but it was restructured, as I said, just to be a little bit more flexible in the still as yet not fully defined human exploration architecture. We did make some significant changes to the planetary protection sub-objective, I think it is. And one of the investigations that was added was to establish an astrobiological baseline before human presence. And there were also changes to the knowledge requirements about the atmospheric state, mainly because the expectation now is that supersonic retropropulsion is going to be the way to deliver large masses to the surface of Mars. And the requirements for atmospheric knowledge are different using that technique. Okay, so next slide. It's a really brief talk. I didn't have a whole lot more to say. Just to point you guys to the point that the latest version of the goals document is always available at this link on the MEPAG website. So please go there, read it, and use it in proposals and white papers to come. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much. Is there a quick question for Don? Okay, hearing none. Why don't we go ahead and, yeah, well, we're about 1 minute over, so